Thank you, Femi. Okay, hi guys. Right, it's brilliant to be at basically what is a AI and party, really. I'm absolutely blown away with the quality of all the presentations and the work that you guys have done. Absolutely outstanding. So I kind of feel like that really wrong, bad uncle that's kind of like gonna come along and embarrassingly like do a big dump in the punch bowl, metaphorically. That's kind of my job, as I see it, as a scientist. We talk a lot about adversarial systems. You've heard the word adversarial quite a lot. How old is that? Well, maybe like 2,600 years, 3,000 years. If you go back to Plato and Aristotle, what were those guys doing? Disputation, which is where somebody sets up a bunch of ideas and somebody else sort of knocks it down. And it's through that process, it's an evolutionary process, that we get stronger and stronger ideas. We home in on the truth that way. So in that spirit, I'm going to be offering a slightly different perspective today. Let's start with a few questions. Has anybody here actually got any formal training in ethics or philosophy of science? Has anybody studied that and got into it? Just kind of wave your hands if you're into that, if you're interested. Yeah. A little bit, good, okay, a few people are into that. But I expect to see a lot more hands now. How many people, and this could be positive as well as negative thoughts and feelings, have struggled ethically or thought deeply ethically about the work that they've been doing related to AI and cybersecurity and so on? Lots more people, right, okay, so this is an emergent field in this area. For us to question, now the most important question is why? Why are we doing this? What for? Yeah. Finally, are there any climate skeptics here? Anyone work for ExxonMobil or anything like that? No, good, good. Because well, otherwise, the rest of this presentation will make no sense to you whatsoever, and you may as well hit an early bar, really. But I'll swerve the punch. Let's see. So why am I asking these questions? Well, as well as being a computer scientist, I'm also a writer. Written a lot in signal processing, this systems theory, that kind of stuff. The current book is Ethics for Hackers, and hence this connection here to what we're doing today. Want to think about like the kind of harms and motives and where we're heading at. You know, this is not a new thing. Again, this is very old tech critique. You have writers like Martin Heidegger, Jacques Ellul, Neil Postman, people like that who've questioned technology, questioned the purpose of technology and the trajectory that we're on, kind of what we're doing it for and why we're going there. Right. So some names, some people. This guy is a grandfather of cybernetics. He's Norbert Wiener. I won't bother to read his quote verbatim, but you can see Norbert Wiener is an extremely intelligent guy, very, very rounded, really into sort of biology and evolutionary theory, the reproduction of systems, the same kind of questions that Quine and Turing were asking about whether systems can be sentient and whether systems can be self-directing and so on. But look at his values. You know, a deeply humanistic person who was extremely worried about the implications of the work that he was doing. He thought that actually that the trajectory of cybernetics tended towards fascism, necessarily. Let's have a look at another guy, Adam Smith, right? Founder of economics. But again, if you actually read Adam Smith, if you get deeply into Smith's work, what you find is this incredibly generous, magnanimous, humanistic figure, obviously influenced by Christian values, deeply skeptical about the future for what, and I think he would abhorred what we now call kind of neoliberal, libertarian kind of versions of capitalism, surveillance capitalism, and all that kind of thing. Absolutely detest it. Another guy, we all know this guy, right? The Fourth World War will be fought with sticks and stones. Yeah. There's Einstein the mathematician and there's Einstein the person, and if you look at Einstein's work and read his writing, what do you find? You find somebody who's passionate about human creativity and deeply worried about our ability to steward the technology that we develop. Okay. You know, going back here for a moment, a lot of people would immediately think in terms of these harms that I'm going to start talking about things like defense and medicine in the context of ethics. And maybe no, you know, maybe that's getting it wrong. I mean, I'm no stranger to that. I work on defense projects, influence, intel, that kind of stuff. And, you know, you can see now, well, for our friends in Ukraine, that is a complex question, but it's not necessarily one where you would, I'm not a pacifist. Okay, I'm not coming at it from that angle. I'm coming at it from somewhere a little bit different. And I want to say that what we see here with these very smart people historically is that they've been the ones who questioned what they were doing their work for. Do you notice that? There's a pattern here. That the ones that stand out are the ones who are skeptical of what they're doing. Now, there's this gang here, Union of Concerned Scientists. Now, cyber and AI are identified as emergent existential threats. Meaning that along with climate change, and here's the connection, we have the ability to wipe ourselves out with the things that we do. And this is the road to hell is paved with good intention scenario, is that most of what we're doing is, of course, the best of intents, right? What we can see with this is that there's not a great deal of room for these questions to be aired and raised. For example, Google, I don't know how many chief ethicists they've got through, but it seems to be an unsustainable post. So as soon as you start to talk about this, you get fired. So there's a sense in which not only is it not on the radar, but it's kind of pushed down somewhat. And what we really have is a kind of domination of the debate by a very small number of powerful interests. Okay, what we'll call tech giants for the purposes of this talk for now. Okay. So, you know, experts have a hard time recently. Well, we should listen to them. Here's a few of them speaking. Sir Tim Berners-Lee, creator of the World Wide Web, you know, expressed his disappointment and, what was it, regret. I mean, that's so sad. That Sir Tim is expressing regret about the trajectory of the web and where we've ended up. Ian Somerville, author of 9 editions of software engineering, they literally wrote the book on software engineering. It was my text in the 80s when I was at UCL. Along with kind of Fred Brooks and Margaret Hamilton, he defines most of these. Software engineering is for the big institutions now, and he says he wasted his life. He looks at modern software. And he wrote a post recently that just literally made me cry. He said, I feel like I've wasted my time. So what should we do? We should listen to these people. Here's Dana Meadows, limits to growth. Hey, there are limits to growth. Liz Truss, listen. Well, limits to growth, okay. She ran up against a lot of opposition. You know, climate change is like 60 years old. We knew lots of the stuff about climate change 50 years ago at least. And it's been a struggle for us to come to terms with that against the suppression of that knowledge. By the companies whose own scientists, like in Exxon and stuff, researched all of this stuff and knew about it and then managed to keep a lid on it. And Dana Meadows, you know, her work again came up against what we see this a small group of interests, small group of powerful interests who are able to set the agenda. This is nothing new. In East India Tea Company, yeah, you know, United Fruits organised coups in South America to keep the bananas going. And so, you know, why should we expect anything different from big tech? They give us free emails, so they seem like nice guys, right? But the cake is a lie. Okay. A graph. We've got to have a graph. So here's one. It is symbolic. Don't read too much into it. This is stuff going up. What's going up? Lines of code are going up. Exploits per line of code are going up. Code is getting less secure. A total number of exploits is going up. So we're building complexity. And as complexity increases, we need more powerful hardware to run that stuff, which opens up more opportunities for us to run more code. There's some good things to that, but there's also some bad things to that, because what's happening is we're building non-resilience, irresilience into our systems. And what we're getting is very much like climate change, is an accumulating debt. You've heard the term technical debt. Well, think of technical debt on a global scale in which The massive interconnected systems we've got, and this is basic software engineering, you know, your module coupling and cohesion gets out of sync. And you've got systems that are very non-resilient. So resilience engineering is now becoming a thing. It's like, what happens, like literally if the internet went off tomorrow and stayed off for 2 months, what would happen? Would we have food riots in the streets? What would happen to our supply chains, and so on? Okay. So building too much dependency into these systems is a bad thing. I'll kind of skip those. It's a more real-world example. You know, I teach this course called Digital Self-Defense, and people say, hey, I would love to come to that. Love to learn how to secure my phone and not get tracked and maintain my privacy. Sign me up. And then they don't come. Even when they paid, they don't turn up to the lesson. Oh, this is strange, what's going on? It's a mystery phenomenon. And it took a doctor friend of mine to explain. She said, we do the same thing. Like we run these seminars on obesity and diet and blood pressure and heart disease and cancer. And they're delivered by experts who are, you know, whose time is incredibly precious. And then people don't come. And if they just came to these sessions, we'd have an amazing preventative medicine, we'd save lots of lives. Why don't people come? Well, it's because, like, ew, who wants to know about that? Right? It's a icky kind of difficult thing, right? Literally, people don't come because you're thinking about the bad things now when we could do something about it is always much more painful than dealing with the consequences at some deferred point. Now there's, you know, solid theories about this in game theory and economics and stuff. You know, it's a deferred bias and things like that. But it's a kind of fundamental flaw of our species is that we're able to do this. Reluctance is also, like, think of it from a physical point of view. You know, something that has a mass and is acted on by a number of vectors of forces will only move when acted upon. And progress is a vector, right? We talked a lot about vectors in AI today. Progress, there's no abstract noun of progress. You can't just say, well, that's progress. Well, progress towards what? In what direction? And when you look at intersecting spheres of interest, one person's progress is another person's dystopia or regression. And people change their ideas very, very slowly. Large groups of people change slowly because they have this reluctance, this inertia to them. All of us have this small few ideas that we don't want to let go of. We're reluctant to drop them, and the saying goes, well, it's hard to convince a man of the truth when his salary depends on believing otherwise, right? That's so true. And so take two-factor authentication, that's an example. If you haven't got the memo, well, that's not a thing now, right? Because, you know, if you knew about the weaknesses in SS7 and GSM and stuff, you never would have dreamed such a crazy idea in the first place. But the point is it took so long for that information to get through and for the models to be analysed and for people to go, oh, hold on, that is a dumb idea, isn't it? Well, maybe we shouldn't do that. Right, so what I mean by distortion is like the distortion of a lens. Technology is not just a thing, it's a lens through which we see other things. So if you run the biggest search engine on the planet that everybody gets their results through, and you get to select those results, you get to change the way that people see the world. Okay? What we therefore get is that a lot of, say, the popular literature on trajectories in AI and cybersecurity is written by the very companies that we want protection from. We want protection from them because they are very, very big and very, very powerful. Okay? So how can we deal with this distortion? Here's a nice example, as the comedian Stuart Lee said of Vodafone's Guide to Online Safety for Children. It was Mr. Fox's Guide to Henhouse Security. And it's like, well, yeah, all right, because, like, you know, they want the kids using them stuff all the time and giving their personal data and so on. Like so. And the danger that we have in education by being entrenched within this distorted view is that the only people that we're making is more guards for the castle. We're not going to turn out graduates and research which is provocative, which is critical, which is innovative, which is anticipatory and sees new things coming because we are kind of have this kind of blinkered view. Okay. Markets don't work very well to solve this. As you can see, the incentives aren't great. We haven't talked too much about business and how to monetize things, but many of them end up being conflicting with the value systems that we've got. what we also get is the problem that markets lead to marketing. And marketing is a form of distortion. Think of these terms, AI, smart, ethical hacking. That's my personal bugbear. You know, we don't do any ethics in ethical hacking. You may have noticed that Immanuel Kant and utilitarianism and Jeremy Bentham are not on the syllabus when we sit down to hack things. And the danger here is that we're just generating we're making the next generation of cyber criminals, because students will leave and they don't have any guidance, and then they will realise that their skills are very, very valuable, but maybe going to work not for the people that we thought they were going to go and work for. Right? And as academics, we should and do know better, but of course, you know, we all chase that buck, and where is that buck? Well, it's choosing those right impact terms and so on. Okie dokie. Yeah. Who's seen Killed by Google? You know, the Google graveyard? Yeah, okay, right. So there's a litany of murdered sites. What's going on here is that we believe that we're engaging in a market economy in which we have a supply-demand thing. So people would want something and they'd ask us, hey, can you make this thing techie? And we go away and we work really hard and we make it and we give it back. So here's this thing, the solution to this problem that you had. It doesn't work like that. It's completely the opposite. It's a possibility-driven culture in which we have solutions looking for problems. We discover something and then we think, well, how can we sell that? And then we go out and find a way to create a demand for it. And so what we get is this inexorable churn, this instability. If you've seen kind of Schelling's models that will never settle on a state. This is kind of what's happening with Google, are brilliant at generating new ideas and products and putting them out there, leaving them up for a couple of years until lots of people are very dependent on them and then axing them and just leaving people hanging. So what we're effectively doing in tech a lot of the time is we're doing R&D in which we're using the entire planet and culture as our personal playground. And that has ethical implications. Let's run through a few of these quick. This is how we respond to this kind of chaotic situation. Our world seems illegible, it seems unpredictable technologically, so we engage in denial, avoidance, I've mentioned these, compartmentalizing, we put things into boxes. We just throw up our hands in the face of complexity and say, you know what, this is all too much for me. And so we end up engaging in what sort of superstitious behaviors and quite irrational. And there's a paradox in technology that the rational leads to an irrational response. Yeah? Learned helplessness, comforting stories, and appeals to authority, especially the empty assurances of unreliable authority figures. Yeah? That's a real danger. Okay. We will say these things, hey, it's just a glitch. Oh, these are unprecedented times. Yeah? Unprecedented times. Well, every time is unprecedented. This never happened before. And judging by the look on Femi's face, it will never happen again. But you know, these are little things that we deliver, right? We say, you've got to break some eggs to make an omelette, right? Move fast and break things. Broken is the new normal. Creepy is the new cool. Everyone's doing it. The idea of technological determinism and so on. None of these, absolutely none of these, are sound ethical stances to the problem that we're talking about. Neither is this phenomenon of productization, in which we turn solutions into symbols of those solutions. What I mean by that is that we have products instead of principles, which is a very brittle kind of education and research, because once you go out and the world changes, which it does very, very quickly, those things kind of cease to work, whereas principles are enduring. This can lead to like kind of cargo cultism and as I said, sort of wishful thinking and almost quasi-religious behavior around technology. Technology is becoming almost a religious thing, right? The end product, the end result of this, I think many people recognize as domestication. An incredible lack of respect for the so-called user. What's the film? It's the Social Network, Social Dilemma, in which he says, The drugs industry is the only other industry apart from tech which has users, right? So what does that say about us as users? Okay. That we are dependent, that we're effectively quite helpless. We have these computers which have become appliances, and we've moved away from the digital literacy of the 1980s and so on, which sought to educate all of us, as make us very literate in computing, and regressed back from that towards kind of users of appliances in which there's a war on general purpose computing. We live in walled gardens and so on. So let's talk about some responses to this and kind of where I'm coming at in terms of policy, and how do we manage and direct studies and research in universities so that we end up aiming towards a genuinely greater good, that we don't find out that there are things hidden away within the projects that we've got which ultimately are facilitating dystopian futures, fascism, mass surveillance, bad things. Okay. Well, there's this notion of digital self-defense that I've mentioned. Several of the students have been working on this. This is bringing cybersecurity back to the individual so that it's something that's mindful and you're thoughtful about in your day-to-day activities of like shopping and what the kids are using computers at school for, that kind of thing, right? One of our students, Ed, very awesomely managed to... Who was the minister, Ed? Who was the minister who replied to the civic cybersecurity and self-defense? Do you remember? Amazing. Well, there's a smart person, right? We've managed to get one of our members of parliament to recognise and use the terms which we've been cultivating here. Civic cybersecurity and digital self-defense. Civic cybersecurity is cybersecurity and awareness of things, algorithmic choices, and how big tech is working in your daily lives. Awareness of that and an understanding to take a defensive posture for your human rights, for your privacy, for your self-determination, for your technical mobility, stop you being stuck in walled gardens, that kind of thing, right? There's been actually a lot of really good movement lately, politically. So just off the top of my head, there's the new online safety bill, which is ostensibly good. I mean, some of the implementation is going to be a shit show. It's going to impinge on speech and do bad things. But overall, it's a good instrument, and it's a positive direction. The EU interoperability framework is magnificent. I think what Europe are doing is great. We're moving towards forcing interoperability. There is no reason why you should not be able to use Teams with Zoom, and anybody like my Jitsi client or whatever should be able to interconnect with that. That we shouldn't have standards like how we did in the 1980s for email and communication systems. They should be interoperable. And so there's a strong force here building to make sure that this kind of stuff happens, so that we can have choice, make informed decisions and so on. Right, last slide. How do we address the bad effects of technology on the human and cultural environment? What I'm thinking of is that as climate change is a threat to our real environment, there are threats to our cultural environment in our digital lives. And there are also tipping points beyond which we're going to find it very, very hard to recover. Dependency is one. As we have in climate, we have dependency on fossil fuels. But pollution. Now, Bruce Schneier, the security researcher, was one of the first to identify data as a form of pollution. Data can be a liability as well as an asset, right? And it can be a pollution. So are we able to change our viewpoint to be able to see big tech, AI and surveillance, not ambivalently and objectively, not just as good things and panaceas, but also as potentially first-class threats? Can we reform digital literacy? Can we reintroduce a new digital literacy, if you like, an everyman's cultural view of it? And to that extent, I believe very strongly that this is a national security issue. Yeah, national security, if nothing else, is nothing but the sum total of every individual's earned security. Right? What is the point of having a load of dishes at Cheltenham looking at satellites if your granny can't shop safely online and your children at school are being, spied on? This is corroding the fabric of society at a much lower level underneath the radar. So I think it's a real national security issue. And, oh good, we'll have some questions, that's great, yeah. Is that 5 minutes to just shut up for me, and then we'll have questions? Yeah, okay, cool. Okay. So can we move security away from being an abstract now, Security for who, security from who or what, and security to what end? Those are very, very important questions. The same thing should be applied to algorithms and AI. We need to question whose interests they serve and philosophically what their telos is. What is the end of them? We don't know the kind of technological society we want. We can't make those choices, right? A smart city can't just be smart. I mean, smart about what? And why is it smart, right? What are we trying to do? Let me give you an example. I don't mean to disparage anyone's work they presented today, but we've seen 2 examples where we wanted to basically facilitate potentially more traffic. Yeah, we could increase the throughput on the roads and increase parking. But then we're increasing the number of cars on the road, right? Because the use will always expand to fit the capacity available. We know that from all sides of systems theory. So I'm just kind of putting that out there as the kind of questions that we would need to ask right at the very beginning. Okay. Okay. So to that end, I have designed a new course. It may be something that's delivered here at Solent. I don't know. It is computer security, cryptography, and counter-surveillance. It's a very mature, joined-up version of cybersecurity that takes these kinds of viewpoints, incorporates civic cybersecurity, personal digital self-defense, and is for kind of people like journalists, police doing investigations, people in service, health professionals, anybody who has to handle data and deal with it, to think in a very much more mature way about how they use technology and how they protect data. Okay, that's it from me. Thank you. I'll take some questions.
Thank you very much, Andy. So we've been here since morning 9 o'clock or 9:30, and we have had good and fantastic lectures from different speakers, ranging from the keynote speakers to the student presenter. Fantastic work so far, and then teacher from Andy, which is one of us here. I want to ask, has anyone got questions for Andy? So we can carry on. Yeah.
First of all, thank you for great presentations. I really like the point about digital literacy. I think it's a really good point that we should increase it. But my question would be, do you think that's actually achievable? Because humans tend to choose convenience over understanding when they can.
They do value that. They do value convenience over understanding. That's a failure of culture, not necessarily education, because we have great education, as you know here. Is it achievable? Yes, it's achievable because it has been achieved, and just axiomatically, anything that has been achieved can be achieved. So we've had digital literacy in the 80s. What happened in the 80s, I think, was that it spawned a generation of people like myself who grew up and they formed new industries like the games industry and web and things like that. And it was so disruptive, I think the incumbents were caught with their pants down. Because I'm never going to let that happen again. It kind of happened in the 90s with the web, which led to the Arab Spring. And so I don't think anyone anticipated how disruptive digital literacy would be. So I think there is a kind of a force against it because of that. But I certainly think it's possible. And I'm very optimistic, and I hold people's ability to understand things in very high regard. I have to be, I'm a teacher. Right?
In the same thing, like there are things that didn't go that way. So for example, say like cars, like ABS systems, like, like a braking system, used to be not a thing, and everybody drove just fine. Now it's in every single car, and nobody cares how it works or why it works or what it even does. They just know that they press the brake and it works similar way, AI and all the other.
So long as that advance has no negative effects, then that doesn't matter. That is progress. Why would you kind of go and use a shovel when you've got a JCB? But if it does lead to problems, then we need to question it, we need to unpack it, and we need to understand it, because ignorance will not help.
Thank you.
Yep.
Any other questions?
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah. Talking about the area where you talk about creating the problem and also creating the need to solve the problem.
Yeah.
Could you throw more light on that?
Yes, this is a really interesting thing, Francis. It's like, are we a solution-based society in which this is the classic way of looking at things. It's the dialectic, is that we have a problem, we research the problem, we come up with a solution, and then we deploy that solution. And ideally, the problem would go away, and that would be the end of it. There's two things that can go wrong here. One is that the solution itself leads to more problems. As I was kind of explaining earlier, at least adds more complexity. And so we can sometimes call that solutionism, in which we end up actually bifurcating into more and more problems created by the solutions. The great one of that is in The Simpsons, isn't it? Which is kind of, what is it? They keep introducing these predator species in Springfield, and at the end of the day, well, that's the beauty. When the winter comes along, the gorillas just die of cold. It's just so inhumane in this application of gratuitous application of solutions. That's one danger. The other is that we are not problem-driven at all. We start with ideas which can be marketed, which we can make money from, and then we create problems to serve that. And there's lots of that around. I can give you lots and lots of examples. The Japanese have a word for chindogu, which means useless tool. It means kind of a piece of technology that you make kind of because it's immediately desirable and you think you want one, and then you think, oh my goodness, that's actually completely useless. And it's really regressive, and it's just another piece of landfill fodder to kind of become e-waste, right? So.
One final one, and then we'll let Hanley go. Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, so it's a bit of a multifaceted one, but in terms of like machine learning, like you mentioned,
Yeah.
we'd have the problem, and then we'd have the model, train the model, test the model, save the model.
Yeah.
How do you apply that to ethics? And in the sense that you might have something which is feasible now in terms of ethics,
Yeah.
but how do you protract that for 10 years' time, 20 years' time, and who is the one that should be responsible for saying this is ethically good or bad,
Yeah.
etc.?
Okay, so I'll start right at the end with the sort of appeal to authority. There is no such authority. Necessarily, that authority has to be yourself. And the ways in which you can exercise that authority is in choices around technology. You can choose to use something or choose not to. So, for example, think of like the cashless society. What is the consequences when you have no actual physical cash? You can't pay waiters, can't tip waiters, you can't give money to homeless people, you can't donate to charity, an event you can't teach your children about money because they can't count anymore, and there's no, so you follow this through, Again, think about, say, facial recognition. What's the consequences when everybody has the facial recognition? This will happen, hear me now. Will have this on their phone, and you'll just be able to point it at any random person in the street and know who they are. Now you're back to basically living in a village. This is how we lived sort of 300 years ago. That wasn't so bad when you know literally who everybody is, but you need to think, well, what would the consequences of that be in developing that technology? And with machine learning, what you're doing, is any data set is necessarily finite. And so what you exclude from that data set, and we've seen this with the kind of the racist hand dryer, haven't we, and the racist facial recognition and so on. It's what you choose not to put in that data by your sampling has implicit ethics in it. It's immanent within your choices as a researcher. So you may not be aware of the things that you're doing which lead to ethical questions later on. But it maybe if we had this stuff on the syllabus right from the get-go and people thought about it more, then those things might not happen. No. I hope that kind of answers your multifaceted question. Thank you.
Okay. So yeah, we would want to put a stop to that now, and then if you go for the questions, obviously Andy is still around, and then we can always go.
Thanks, Connie.